All right, folks, my name is Salim Juma, your host of the Colored Conservatives, and today we are at the University of Washington to talk about a very serious issue, in my opinion. So, the term Nazi is thrown around pretty regularly, especially in politics, anywhere in journalism, Nazi, 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 yada, yada, yada. But my question is, why is communism and communists not as reviled and hated by the general public as Nazis, right? So, some people on the right like to say that Nazis are far left because they were socialists, but some people call it, for the purposes of this video, we're going to call Nazis the far, far, far right. But basically, communists are the far, far, far left, and the way I look at it is communists have killed 100 million people. Stalin alone murdered, millions by himself. So why is it that you're allowed to be a communist? Why is it that it's not that big of a deal? It's totally fine. You won't get fired from your job. You won't. People won't target your family. But I mean, if you even are slightly to the right of Bernie freaking Sanders, you are called a Nazi these days and attacked overtly. Now, the actual neo-Nazis, well, let's just say they live on the very, very fringes of the society. And I just want to find out why there's not really a comparison with the two, and if anyone can tell me why it's okay to be a communist. So with that, make sure you subscribe, hit that notification bell, support me on Patreon and Cash App and Venmo and all that kind of stuff. And as always, stay classy, Seattle. So the question we have today is we're asking, why is the term communist not as reveled as the term Nazi? I mean, you guys, if you follow any politics at all, everyone to the right of Bernie freaking Sanders is being called a Nazi. It's all over journalism, it's in sports, it's everywhere. So why is it that you can be a communist and be in mainstream society and be totally fine, but if you purport any right-wing views, it's a problem? So why is Nazi not equal to communist?
I feel like there's a lot of distortion with media of what's okay and what's not okay. Nazi can be thrown around because we can all agree that everyone's wrong on that one, but if you throw out conservative or anything like that, it's like a guaranteed 50% of the people, or maybe more, especially around here, are not appreciated for it. So
believe me, I know.
Yeah. What do you have to say, Pete?
So I'd say that pretty much when you're talking about like the difference between like Nazi and communist, like when you're talking about communist, you're thinking almost on like a scale of like political beliefs or like a spectrum, and when you're talking about Nazi, you're talking about like a specific regime. And like the truth is, when you talk about Nazis, you're talking about like genocide and like mass corruption in politics, stuff
Peter,
like that.
what
And
interesting
communism
thing
is, like, broader, I'd say.
I do agree to a point, but there are actual Nazi parties all over the world now.
Yeah.
Granted, the first one started in Germany, but I mean, Iran, for instance, you would never expect that there would be an Iranian Nazi party, and there actually is. So it is a political ideology too, but I guess what I'm trying to get to the bottom of is if communism killed 100 million people and slaughtered people all over, the world, mind you, why is it that Nazi, even if you don't identify as necessarily a Nazi, but even far right people, so I'm talking about like the alt-right, not people who your average liberal would call far right, like Ben Shapiro or even Stefan Molyneux. I'm talking about people like Nick Fuentes or Faith Goldy or something like that, right? Why is it that they get canceled, kicked off, Twitter and Patreon and all this? But I mean, if you are a goddamn communist, it is totally fine. The American Communist Party, there's communists all over Seattle. I'm just not understanding. Communists killed a lot more people, so why is there that differentiation? Do you think it has anything to do with the media's narrative?
I'd say it almost just goes back to a history thing, because I think when you're talking about like internally in America, one of the huge issues that people have to deal with, like baggage-wise, I guess, is like the rise of like neo-Nazis and the KKK and things affiliated with the term Nazi in general. And I think that you just haven't seen like the same like groups of like people willing to do these hate crimes when you talk about communists in America specifically.
What about the Weather Underground? They committed a lot of terrorist attacks. Not just them, but I mean, you have Antifa these days. I mean, they're hard left, anarcho anarcho-communist. I'm not really sure how that one works. But, I mean, you do have a lot of political violence from the hard left and communists in general, not to mention, I mean, the Cold War, right? That wasn't just us against the Soviets either. I mean, there were proxy wars all over the world. Parts of Africa, South America. We toppled regimes under the Reagan administration because they were goddamn commies. So I guess, yeah, I'm just trying to find out what, like, the differentiation is and why is it that you're allowed to be a communist but not a Nazi. I don't want to say, like, I'm praising Nazism, obviously. Right. I mean, everybody knows that's bad, but why is there that differentiation? Do you want to?
Yeah, I think maybe as far as Nazi goes, as far as, like, being National Socialist, I'm not, obviously, but as far as it goes, it's very easy to pinpoint Nazi to one location and one time.
Sure.
And so it's easy to associate that with hate. And then there's like an entire world that with a majority of some people that live in communism still. And so I think that since it hasn't been fully abolished or doesn't seem to be fully abolished, it's a lot easier to just point fingers to one direction and then ignore the other, I guess. So that would mean communism, since it still exists very evidently, I feel like you would be offending a lot more people by calling someone communist negatively than calling someone Nazi negatively.
You absolutely would. That definitely makes sense. Do you think the media throwing around the word Nazi over and over and over again has lessened the kind of strength of the term, kind of like racism, sexism, homophobia?
Oh yeah, by calling modern day conservatives Nazis, you're basically, I'm not going to say, appropriating the term and saying basically you're the same as the people that killed millions of Jews and homosexuals and lots of people that just didn't fit in. And so I think that basically calling it that isn't even fair, I guess. The terms, in some circumstances, like the neo-Nazi term, I guess I understand that far of a degree would be called something like that, but it seems like it should be kept to be the same as the negative communist and negative Nazi terms. Like they're not. If they're going to be negative, they're both negative. If they're positive, they're both positive. I don't think it's a matter of which is worse.
Personally, no, I totally understand. It's just, for me, it's just so hard to understand. If communists killed so many people all around the world in all these different countries, it's like, why isn't there just a line drawn?
Yeah.
Communism needs to go, bye-bye,
yeah.
Right? I mean, especially, it's not so different from the Nazis. I mean, the gulags of the Soviet Union, really not all that different. They didn't have gas chambers, but a lot of people died in those work camps. Mm-hmm. How do you guys identify politically, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah. I grew up in a conservative household, and so I've always kind of leaned that way, but I have a lot.
You lean right.
Yeah, I have a lot of liberal beliefs too. So, I don't want to say one or the other, but I lean one way. Yeah, I lean to the right. Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah, again, I'd say I'm pretty middle ground politically. I grew up in Seattle, so that has a lot of influence on me, but other than that, I've never really leaned one way or another.
So the question we're asking here today is, the term Nazi is thrown on all over the political spectrum. It's thrown over all journalism. As a matter of fact, I mean, there's people on the far left that'll call you a Nazi for just, not being a socialist. So my question is, why is the term Nazi, or why is the term communist not as reveled as the term Nazi when communists have killed hundreds of millions of people?
I don't think I'm knowledgeable enough to answer that.
No, it's just your opinion though.
Why is it not as reveled?
Like hated by the general public and all that,
I think that just depends on who you ask, man. I feel as though in terms of the history, at least of the country, or at least in most people's minds, Nazi just brings up a much more fearful image, one that's kind of bridled by hate and everything.
Do you think it's because we fought them?
That we fought them?
Yeah. Personally, our country did.
I think it was just I guess the message behind it. I'm sure that has something to do with it, sure. But you could argue that, but I don't know. Me personally, I just think that the images or the messages tied to it are a lot more
A lot more horrific with the eugenics and
I would say so.
yeah, the racism stuff. Because I just find it interesting from a purely statistical metric standpoint. Communist countries have killed far more people. I mean, you look at Pol Pot, Chairman Mao, Joseph Stalin. Together, communist countries have. God, it's awful. What I just can't figure out is these days, why is the term Nazi thrown around? And if you are called a Nazi, and if they can find a joke you made from 10 years ago or something like that, and stick it to you, your life is over. You're on the fringes, my friend. But it's perfectly fine to be a communist. There's an American Communist Party. We have a full party here in Seattle that are full of communists. It's okay to be a communist, and frankly, be public about it and still be in public life. I'm not really understanding the correlation there.
Nazis were communists.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, not exactly like all that knowledgeable on that.
That's totally fine. It's something to think about, though.
Yeah, sure. I don't know, man. Like, at this point in time, I think most people are just trying to, like, live and not really, like, create as much waves in the boat as they can, Because, like, ideally...
Do you ever worry about, like, getting canceled? Do you worry that maybe a tweet of yours... Do you know what cancel culture is?
Yeah, actually.
Okay, so you remember what happened, like, Kevin Hart and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be honest about that, man. Like, do I think that sensitivity is at an all-time high? Honestly, I do. Like...
Do you think it's kind of a problem?
A problem? I would say in a way, yeah.
Do you, like, okay, here's a good example. You know who Andrew Yang is, right? The Yang Gang maestro, the guy that wants to give $1,000 to every American if he wins the presidency?
Nah.
Okay, well, somebody made fun of, somebody was supposed to get hired by SNL, and he basically made a racist joke about Yang. I don't know exactly what it was, but it was referring to his Asian heritage. And he got canceled. They basically said, we don't want to hire you anymore. He took a lot of shit on Twitter, yada, yada, yada. But Yang was just like, I mean, it is what it is. I mean, racism shouldn't be tolerated. How do you think we can kind of fix that? Or do you think it should even, like, be fixed? Or, like, is it a good thing?
Oh, should it be fixed?
Yeah.
I don't think it's, like, a question of should. Because, like, ideally, like, we all come to understand each other. And, like, ideally, we be as, like, nice as we can. But I think, like... it's more of a how than a what, because like I personally think that most people, if they took the time to talk to each other, we'd agree on like what has to be done, just like not like the way it is.
I couldn't agree more. As I'm a Republican Trump supporter, and I actually agree with many, many liberals on many, many topics.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like the personal thing it's just that, it's egos get in the way on both sides and everything. That's like what me and my friends like have come to understand. It's just like it's like rough talking to both,
Do you have friends from both sides of the spectrum?
I would say so, but at least for like my life in particular, politics doesn't run our friendships. I think that's how it should be.
Body, I'm an icon, man. And my girl about a 10. I should fuck her in the Benz.